So this is a little image that we're going to be painting today, a little vineyard scene. And this is the reference photo that I took this image from. And to paint the image, I wanted to simplify it. And like everything else that I paint, I'm going to emphasize the things that I really liked about the image and de-emphasize the things that I wasn't as excited about. You'll also notice in this one there's a whole lot of background going on here with many layers of hills going back, which I completely simplified. If I were doing a large painting, maybe an 18 by 24 or something along that size, I would probably add some of that back in there just for interest. But with such a small painting, I'm just editing it down to the more the simplest aspects of what the painting is. And mostly what I loved about this scene, and what I always love about landscapes, is the way the light shines through these green leaves. This photo is kind of, it's darkened all these darks into just a dark mask because I'm not a very good photographer, but we'll fill that back in with interest, using our imagination. So I love the way the light goes through these leaves and makes these shapes, and they rise up above here, which is what I really emphasized. And then I left this background purpley color, so the green and purple really set each other off nicely. And then we have this line of the way the vineyards form this V shape, and that is a very strong leading line that leads your eye back like this. So I really like this tree back here as something that stops your eye, and then that line, as your eye comes in and travels down the vines, it's then directed back into the image with this shape, so you get that circular thing going on. And then of course the other thing I liked was the way there was some wildflowers back in here, and I added my own to make it even more fun. I added some of these purple ones to complement the vines. This was actually taken very late in the season, and most of the grapes are gone. They've already been harvested, but I wanted to add that feeling of the grapes hanging in there as well. So that's what we're going to be working on today, and we're just going to go ahead and jump into it. And what I did this time was made this little tiny version of the painting so we could have that in the scene at the same time. Hopefully that will work, give you a reminder of what we're working on there. And I'll keep these nearby so that I can grab them when I need them. Okay, so here's our little 8 by 10 canvas that we're working with. One thing I did, this is a fairly inexpensive canvas, and one little trick that you might not know is that sometimes the less expensive ones can be a little bit loose when you buy them. But if you just take your spray bottle and spray the back of the canvas with water and just rub it in, it'll tighten that canvas right up. So that's something I had to do with this canvas before we got started. So the first thing that I like to do is tone the canvas first. Get one thin layer of paint over the canvas just so that it can start to fill in that canvas and get absorbed by the canvas and make the rest of the layers easier to do. So to do that, I'm going to take a larger brush. This one's about, I don't know, 1/2 inch wide. And I always use a firm synthetic brush. You need something firm when you're working with acrylics, just to push that paint around. What we're going to do is just use a color to block in. And I think for fun this time, because this is vineyards, I'm going to use some kind of a purple to just tone the canvas. So I'm going into my ultramarine blue, and I'm going to add Let's add some alizarin crimson to that. This is, it's not going to be a real bright purple, but I just want some kind of a purple tone to put down on the canvas first. And really you can use any color you want for this underpainting because mostly we cover it up. Let's see, how dark is that? That's pretty dark. You notice I always test on my canvas how dark something is versus just looking at your palette, and because that's just a good habit to get into. So this is, actually kind of fairly dark, but I'm all right with that. I'm going to go ahead and take a little white on my brush, and up here where we're going to have the sky, I'm just going to add a little white to that to make it a little lighter up on top. Again, this is just toning our canvas to start with so that we have something to work on and we start to fill up the canvas, the little weave of the canvas, so it's not as obvious, and keep our paint from soaking in. You notice the white as I'm putting it down here is a little bit dirty from my palette because I just reuse my paint over and over again. Well, I don't reuse the paint exactly, but I transfer the extra paint from my palette to my next palette so I don't waste any paint. So, but I wasn't real careful this time to take out all the dirty paint, so it is a little dirty. So I'm just going to add a little more white to that. I just put a blob of clean white on top of it. So I'll have to be careful as I'm working today that I don't pick up any unwanted colors. So just go ahead and fill your canvas up like this. You're trying to get a thin layer. You want it to dry quickly. So you notice I'm really kind of scrubbing the canvas. I'm really pushing it into the canvas and thinning it out because we don't want to have to wait 10 minutes for it to dry. It should dry in a couple of minutes. And as much time as it takes to talk about our composition, it should be dry. So I'm running out. I'm going to add a little more blue to this. So I'm running out of paint. And a little more red. Using alizarin crimson again and my ultramarine blue and white. The next stage is going to be our drawing. And so we're going to let this dry for a minute and we're going to think about this composition. So, as we've talked about a bunch of times, we're thinking about just big shapes when you're thinking about the composition. So we've got this large shape of light colored sunlit vines, and then we've got a shape underneath it that's the shadow of the sunlit vines. We've got a shape here that's the tree, and that kind of connects to this shadow shape here. Those are kind of all one value, just a dark value. Okay, we've got, of course, the shape that's our background mountains, and the shape that's our sky, and then we've got a shape here that's the sunlit foreground. So it's really pretty simple. Remember, when you're looking at your shapes, they are not, it's not necessarily an element like the vines. You notice I break the vines up in my mind into two shapes, the shadow and the light. So what you're really thinking about is values, how light or dark a certain area is. And you want to connect those shapes that are of similar value, and just think about those shapes as shapes, not necessarily as tree, vine, ground, but just start getting your eye working on interpreting that as a shape that's a certain color, a certain value, and a certain edge, versus thinking about it as a vine or a tree. Okay, so that's really what we're going to be thinking about a lot when we move forward. Now, when you do your drawing, we're going to go ahead and just use a small brush. You can either use a flat brush like this one. So generally for the whole painting, we'll be using a couple of flat brushes or bright brushes, that's what they're also called, and a couple of sizes. This is about maybe 3/8 of an inch wide and 1/4 of an inch wide. We may use a round brush. I don't use it very often, but sometimes for a small shape you might want to use just a small round brush. And then this one, actually let's move to this one. This one is a rigger brush or a liner brush. They're called two different things. And it's just a long, thin brush. And it's very flexible, and it's really good for making little twigs and leaves and whatnot like that. So those are the brushes you need, but if you don't have all those brushes and you have different brushes, don't worry about it. That will work fine too. You can just work with what you've got. For colors, we've got my usual palette: titanium white, Hansa yellow medium, Indian yellow, Napthol red light, Alizarin crimson, Ultramarine blue, and Pthalo blue green shade. If you don't have those, don't worry about that. As long as you have a red, a yellow, and a blue, you can mix the colors that you're going to want. Or if you also have a mixed green or a mixed purple, that works too. You know, it's your painting will turn out a little bit different, but that's okay. You just want to keep in mind having the relationships the same. So the values, the relationship and the values, that's really the key part of it. So let's go ahead, and that's pretty good there. Let's go ahead and do our drawing. Now, a drawing is just a roadmap. It's just a way to keep in mind where we're going to put things, and just as an overall idea where we're going with this, so we don't get lost. And that's why I call it a roadmap. It's just so we don't get lost in the painting. I'm going to look first at where I've put this this line here, and it's just about halfway, which is fine. You know, in general, you don't want things to be cut in half, but it's not really in half because it widens out to a lot bigger. So we're going to start that there. That's kind of where the ground line is. And then the vines start a little bit higher than that, not a lot. And they're going to go clear up here to the edge of the canvas in a line, something like that. And then down here, they stop almost about in here, and we get this nice perspective effect going on, where that's going into the distance and giving us perspective, which is really cool. And we got this tree coming about, if this is half, it's not quite half, so it's over in here. Doesn't come up to the top, so it's kind of in this area. We might change the shape if we decide to. That's where that tree is. And then the mountains come in here somewhere like this. And they go behind the tree a little bit. So it's really pretty simple as far as the simple things. The other thing I want to put in now, just so that I get it set in my mind, is where are these posts going to be? So I make sure that I get that, again, the perspective of the posts going back into the distance. So this one starts about here, and it comes down almost to here, I'd say. It's maybe over a little bit. So this post is about in this area. So you notice if you pay attention to where they stop and start, that's helpful. So this, you'll notice the bottoms of the posts there are also at an angle and disappear into that receding line there. So the posts are kind of on this line down here. The first one's clear over here, and then look at that second one. It's clear over even just past the center. And it's really important to get those relative sizes so that your perspective is good, you know, because your mind is going to want to put these closer together and evenly space them as you go out. And you want each space to get a little bit shorter. So if that one's that, then this one's going to be even shorter than that. And then we start going just into disappearing back there. But that's important to get those settled. The other lines we have going on are the lines of the bottoms here of the vines, and you see they go back at a slight angle here. Oh, stuck my wet finger to it. And so we want to think about that, how especially this one's the one that's really obvious. It's almost horizontal, but it's slightly going up. Gotta have some paint on my brush. And there'll be some going from here. And so these are going to be horizontal to each other, distance-wise. They're not gonna get shorter together. They're just gonna go straight back. So you got those showing up. So those are kind of our important lines to think about. It's almost like we're dealing with a building, but not quite. But we're still dealing with the man-made objects with harsh edges and the perspective going back. There's our simple drawing laid out. So I'm going to move to this larger of my flat brushes to do the next layer. And the next layer is the block-in, what we call the block-in. And we're just really thinking about values at this time. So how light or dark are things compared to other things? And so we're going to think about how light are we going to want that sky. So let's start with white. I have a feeling this color might be really good already just for those background mountains. We might not have to change that much. So I'm starting with my white. I'm going to add just a touch of ultramarine and a touch of phthalo. It gives us sort of a combination blue there that I like for a sky. And we want to get it nice and light. And let's see what that does. That's pretty light. I think I'll go with that for now. Remember, in acrylics, they dry darker. So if you put it down at first and it seems a little bit too light, it's probably just about right. If it's too light, it's just about right. That's what we say. All right, so these background hills are going to be really simple. They don't have to be quite as simple as in our reference photo, but they can be. And that's kind of up to you. I'm going to go right over that line I did because I don't want that line to be really obvious. Adding a little more ultramarine. All right, so there's some blue. That's kind of the value that we want back there. So that's looking good. Remember, don't fuss so much about the color at this stage, but think more about the value. Is it light enough? Is it dark enough? Because we'll come back and do another layer. So I'm wanting these background hills. I don't mind the value too much, but I want them to be a little bluer than that. So I'm going to go ahead and use my purple pile, add more blue to it. So I get a little bit of a bluer color, and that was ultramarine blue that I added. Let's see, it's a little bluer, just a tad of phthalo. It's gonna help, I think. And then a little bit lighter. Because you see how that looked like about the same value? That means it'll dry darker. Let's try that. Yeah, I like that. So here we go with our mountains back here. We just want a soft edge. And I'm going to put in some mountains. I'm going all the way over here beyond where the tree was, because you'll get these little bits of the mountains behind the tree, and that helps us get started there. So this is the block in, so I'm not going to do any detail on those mountains right now. I'm just going to leave that real simply. Let's get a light green. Now, if I want to make a bright green color, which is what the greens in these vines are really nice and bright and vivid. So I'm going to use Phthalo blue to start with, and I'm going to go into my Hansa yellow, and that's going to give me a nice bright vivid green. Lots of yellow, very little phthalo. Remember, phthalo is kind of a bully when it comes to mixtures, and it's going to really tint anything we've got very, very bright and very green. So be sure and get enough yellow in that mixture. You noticed I added a bunch of white there and a little more yellow, and just, you know, mixing paint is about comparisons, and it's about trial and error. So you just give it a try. There's no perfect recipes for things. You never know until you try it if it's going to be light. And from one painting to the next, even if you had a perfect recipe and you try it on another painting, it might be completely wrong because of the other colors in the painting. The other colors have just a huge influence on the color. So you notice I'm just doing a big flat shape, just blocking this in and looking at my reference photo and just following the shape of this lighter area and the way it comes down a little bit around the posts and comes back up. So, and I've got some of that green down here. I think I'll mix that in here. Got some coming around here. Just mixing that in, because all I'm doing is filling in the big spaces and the big shapes. Okay, so now let's get a darker green to fill in this big area. And this is also not only darker, but it's more neutral. It's not as bright and chromatic as this green. So we're going to do this green using Ultramarine and Indian yellow. And that's going to give us a little bit more of a neutral green, and it's going to give us a darker green. It's just the nature of those colors. The ultramarine has a lot of red in it, so, well, it leans towards the red. It doesn't really have red in it. And so it's going to neutralize your green color, because red neutralizes green because it's the complementary color to green. And we've talked about that quite a bit too. The way to neutralize a color, make it a little more gray, is to add its complement. So I'm going to just fill this in with this darker green, and I'm going to put some of it there like that. I'm going to now I'm going to add more blue to it as I go back. And I'm also going to add a little white to it, tiny bit, just a tiny bit this time, to remind myself that as I go back in my painting, these darks are going to get lighter and more neutral and bluer. So anything that you're doing that's receding into the distance is going to get lighter and more neutral as you go back. And that's just something we remember with all of our paintings. So I'm just filling those big shapes in. I'm not being real careful with it. I think I'm going to add, I didn't mean to get that phthalo. Don't do what I do. Okay, I'm going to add a little blue to this too, just because I want it darker and bluer. So see, that's still wet, so I can still kind of mix that in. And I'm still, you notice, working very thinly. I don't want to build up a lot of paint layers yet. thickness of the paint, because it will it won't be able to dry very quickly. And at this point, I just still want to keep these thin layers. All right, oh, so we wanted to use that. I'm going to mix this up. Oh, I brought in that phthalo blue. It's not really what I wanted to do, but it's okay. Add more ultramarine and more of this Indian yellow. And I'm going to add a little bit of red. I'm just going to use my Napthol red. And that's really going to neutralize this green. So adding that complement to neutralize the green. A little too dark. I don't want the dark in the background there to be darker than the darks in my foreground. So I'm going to make sure to keep those a little bit lighter. Let me just mix in some white. That will lighten that up a little bit, probably too much, but we can come back to that. So this tree is going to come clear over here like this, and over here like this, and we just get that big shape blocked in. And we're just blocking in big shapes to get us started. Okay, now we've got some ground to block in. It's mostly kind of a golden color, so I'll start with that Indian yellow, and I will do this. All right, because we'll come back on the next layer and do our finishing. We want to use a bigger brush and just get that layer of paint in about the right value. Now this ground level here, layer, ground plane. So when you think about paintings, you think about planes, and this one's flat to the sky, right? And so it's going to be very light because it's reflecting the light sky. Most of the light is hitting it, versus these shapes that are not horizontal but vertical, so they're not getting as much light. So you see how messy I am? I'm not being careful to really fill in or be real careful or cautious at this point. I'm just getting that color in there. You'll notice this light color goes behind these vines there. We see it underneath there, and that establishes this interesting pattern made by the trunks of the vines going in and out there. So that's kind of fun. We want to remember that, and so we want to be sure and get some of this back here. And we're also going to use some shadow. So that's just Indian yellow and white. Now let's take and get some sort of a shadow. We want a dark that's going to go under here in the shadow. And I'm going to start with Indian yellow again. I'm going to add some ultramarine to it. I'm trying to neutralize it. So remember, in neutralizing a color, here's some alizarin crimson. You're going to add the complement. So the complement to yellow is purple, which is made up of red and blue. You can also think about it in terms of you're always going to add the other two primary colors to it. So that's kind of a ugly khaki green that I don't like. So I'm going to add more ultramarine blue to it. And we'll see if I like that color anymore. That's okay, but it's not looking like it's golden in shadow. But you know what, I'm going to just do that right now because remember, we're looking for the value. Not worried as much about the color, except that I'm just going to add more blue to that because it's bothering me. So more blue. The value's good for up here. And we'll play with that more in the next layer because I don't like that color at all, but the value's okay. So remember where our posts are. Oh, you know what I'm going to do actually? This is all shadow, and we'll readjust those later. Let's get those posts in so we can have a better idea of where our placement is. So we want to just use a dark to make our posts to start with. We'll add the light to them later. And you can make a great dark, but you're just basically going to put red, yellow, and blue together, all your primaries, to make a neutral dark. And in this case, I'm going to use Alizarin crimson, phthalo blue, and Indian yellow. And that's going to make a nice dark color. Depending on how much you use of each one, it's going to lean in the different directions. But right now we're just looking for that real dark. And our post, you know, as I'm looking at this post is over this way a little too far. So I'm going to come over about here with this post. Already changing things on you, huh? I don't want it to be too close to the edge of the canvas, which is why I changed that. And remember, if you put this canvas in a frame, that frame is going to take up about 1/4 inch. So that's something to think about too. I'm going to add a little more red to that dark because it's looking pretty cool to me. And this paint's all wet on here, so that's mixing together, which we don't want in the end, but right now it's okay. So here's the next post, and I want to make sure I get them going. They kind of lean too a little bit. They're not super straight, so if yours lean a little bit one direction or another, that's okay. And I'm not also being super careful right now, but as they go back, they're also going to get thinner. And then the subsequent layers, I'll be sure and make sure that they're different widths as well, just to get that in there where they're going to be, and so I can know what I'm working with here. And then we're also going to have, I'm just going to use this same dark to just start thinking about where these, remember our line kind of goes back, where the trunks of the vines are, and they're kind of wiggly. And this is one case where you can be symmetrical in how far apart they are, because when people plant things, they do make them symmetrical. So that's kind of fun. Usually when we're painting a row of trees or something, we have to be super careful that they're not distanced symmetrically or they don't look good. So I'm going to take some of this dark green that I had, fill this back in where I moved over the post. Just so I'm covering all that canvas and have my map as I know where I'm going to be going with this. All right, adding a little more white to that for and a little more gold. Let's come down here, and now we know a little more clearly where those shadows are going to be. And the light's coming from over here, and let's see, it's raking across this way. So you can see how these shadows are at an angle like that. So that's something to think about, that they're going this way. See, I've already messed that up because I didn't put my trunks in first. So here's your shadows are coming across here. There's shadows there. Thinking about all that, because this is gonna have to dry a little bit before we make big changes, but I know that this yellow is gonna come way down in here. And if you're working with me, you're going to end up with a lot of mixing of the paint right now because this paint is wet. But I just want to remember that here's my lights that come down to here. So I'm getting that idea. We've got that going on. So we got shadows that are at this angle. We've got these going. Get all these fun angles. This one is so geometric, isn't it? We'll have to fight against that a little bit so that it doesn't get too boring looking. Let's feel. Okay, so my background here is pretty dry, so that I can go ahead and put my finishing touches in the sky. You can see in this sky here I've got a few wispy clouds kind of going in, and that's super easy to do. And then we've got these background mountains with maybe a hint of there being different layers of them by having different values going back. So let's do that. Let's see. Let's start a little bit with the sky again. Ultramarine. This one got a little too towards the phthalo for me. I think I'm going to keep it a little bit on the warmer, more purpley side, because this whole thing is about the purple grapes. So I think that will blend a little bit more. So by doing that, I'm doing more ultramarine blue than phthalo, and I'm getting it light. So I'm just mixing up again, much like we did before. And I'm going to add that. Now see, the thing that I'm looking at is the value. I've already put this value in and I liked it. I liked where it is. So I want to keep that value. So I'm going to be sure that I don't go darker. But instead, I'm going to go slightly lighter. Because remember, if it looks too light, it's about right in terms of the way acrylic paints dry. I'm painting in acrylics today, if you guys didn't know that. So in order to do these clouds, you just want to work really quickly. Get down this layer of white paint, or blue paint. You notice I'm mixing a little more white in it each time I go, because I get closer to the horizon, I want it to get lighter. And I'm going to now I'm thinking a little bit about the shapes of the tops of those mountains. I want to vary them a little bit. Maybe I start lower, go a little, I don't know what they're going to do, but just have some fun and vary them a little bit. And don't go too white on it because it'll start going chalky. So be sure you get some color in there. All right, now while that's still a little bit wet, hopefully, I'm going to take straight white and I'm just going to gently smear that across there. It's going to blend. I want it to blend. I'm barely touching the canvas to get this feeling of wispy clouds going through there. You can also add I'm going to use red this time, just a tiny touch of red. Tiny, just a very corner of your brush to that color. Just to get a different color up there. Maybe those clouds have a little bit of a darker to them. You see how that's just a very, very subtle kind of cloud thing, and you can go do that for a long time. As long as the paint stays a little bit wet, you can do that. I'll do one more layer to get a little bit more of an obvious cloud. Don't want too much. Don't have water on your brush. You want it to be. I see I had too much water on my brush because I'd rinsed it out and I hadn't dried it. So whenever you rinse your brush, be sure and dry it. And if you get too much paint, it's not going to stick. But the way if you get your brush real horizontal to the canvas and barely touch the canvas, you can get some of it to come off when you got a lot of paint going on. So I've got some paint on there. I'm rinsing the brush, I'm drying the brush, and then I'm blending those edges in. If you squint your eyes, you can kind of see the shapes that you're making. Keeping my brush really horizontal to the canvas, really flat to the canvas, so that I don't create too much. There, just a soft wispy cloud going on there. That's kind of fun. It's not going to be a lot in the painting, but it's just going to be a little bit fun. So there's our little sky that we're pretty happy with for now. And now we're going to redo our mountains a little bit. I'm going to use the same pile, come back into it with some ultramarine blue. And I'm just going to see what that does, color and value. It's about right. Again, reshaping the mountains a little bit. Now what I want to do is create a sense that there's another layer behind there of mountains. So I've got that color which is about the same as the one that we had. So I'm going to take it a little bit lighter so that I've got just peeking out here and there. Maybe back here there's a little bit of, and then maybe over here there's a little bit of a distant mountain. See, it's really subtle, but you just get that feeling of the layers of the mountains going back a little bit when you do that. Rinse the brush, dry it off, and smooth out that. Blend that edge a little bit. You don't want a harsh edge, a harsh line way back there in the distance. You want to keep that really loose. Okay, and then if I add more, oh shoot, that's Pthalo. Don't use Pthalo. Let's find ourselves a new place since we've got too much Pthalo there. Ultramarine blue and white. That's all I'm using for these mountains today because this is so colorful. I don't feel the need to neutralize that. So what I'm doing here is I'm going to go slightly darker so I just get that last, another sort of layer of mountains in there. And that last one, I'm going to add a tiny bit of red, tiny bit of red and some white, so that as I get closer here, too much white, blue and red, tiny bit of red and some white, so that on this closer mountain maybe there's a feeling of something going on, like there's layers to this. The sun is hitting it back there, adding more blue to that. Come back into the edge there of your, and blending those shapes. Just gives you the feeling maybe there's something going on back there. It's looking too white to me though. I'm going to add just a tad more red. Because as you go back in the distance, you lose red first as a color. So if something is closer to you, you're going to see more of the red in it. Anyway, these are real subtle little things that I always get distracted on, and they're not going to show up much at all in the finished painting, but it's kind of fun just to play with them. I'm going to add some of that in here. I'm just going to randomly add some of this color back into here, because there'll be some of that showing through in these other layers. So I'm happy enough with that. I've got sort of a feeling of these layers going backwards, something going on there. So, okay, so we did all that, and then we're just moving forward. So the next thing that we're going to work on is this little tree. So I'm going to start with some dark colors. I want to move to smaller shapes now. So I'm going to go from my brush that's about that wide to my little bit thinner brush, which is, oh, I've already got it up here. There it is. It's up here. It's about that. So remember, when you're making form, you're going to have dark, medium, and light. We've got dark areas down here, or in the shadow and in the trunk, and then we've got some medium greens, and then we've got some light greens. And when you have that dark, medium, and light, it helps to create form in your bush so it doesn't feel, or your tree, so it doesn't feel flat. So you notice right along the very edge, these are a little bit darker and more neutral. And then I've got little bit brighter colors and lighter colors here. So that makes this area come forward and gives it more form. So we're going to start with our dark, and we've already got a sort of a base color down there, which is good. So let's put in our branch or trunks of our trees. We have some dark mixed up here, and that dark is just Pthalo, Alizarin, and Indian yellow. But choose any 3 of your primary colors and mix them together and see what you get. You might have to adjust the color. So there's our dark, but this is in the distance, so it's not going to be dark dark. And I also don't want it to be super neutral. That's very, very gray. And I want it to lean towards the red. So I'm putting alizarin crimson in there. All right, so I'm not going to do a lot here, but I just want to think about the fact that there are some branches that go up. Be real loose with it. Doesn't have to be exact. We're just using the side of the brush and making some lines in there just to give us an idea of where that's going. Then we'll take our ultramarine blue and we'll add our Indian yellow and some white for our more neutralized green. Let's see what we've got going on there. I like a little bit of that. So all I'm going to do is just use my brush and just set down. I vary the way that I'm touching the canvas with the brush. I vary the direction of my brush strokes. I'm using the flat of the brush and just flatly laying that down. Sometimes I roll it. Sometimes I use the edge. You just want to just vary those brush strokes a little bit. And I'm being very random. I'm just building up texture into that tree, starting with this dark color. Then every time I go back, I'll just add some other color to it. So I'm adding a little ultramarine blue to that and a little white. So I'm thinking about making those more neutral shapes along the top that are lighter. Need to be even lighter than that. I want them to be lighter and bluer and more neutral because they're further back. Everything that's further back is going to be lighter and bluer and more neutral. So I'm looking for that color, adding more ultramarine blue to it and more white. See, it looks pretty darn light here on the palette, but again, you've got to check it against what's going on your canvas because that's going to matter. I want to neutralize that slightly. So I'm going to go into my alizarin crimson, tapping it off till I get just a tiny bit on my brush. So I want to neutralize that color a little bit. It's going to be subtle, but as you can see that's just a little more neutral. A little more white. This is such a small canvas. You can just work with little tiny shapes. So in order to get those, you notice how along the edge, I've got some little tiny shapes. I'm not drawing each leaf in, but I'm just creating a few little tiny shapes outside of the perimeter of the tree and then connecting them within there. You don't want to have polka dots. You just want to get a few shapes going on. Remember, we think in terms of shape, color, value, and edge, as opposed to thinking about, oh, I'm painting a tree right now. We're painting a particular shape, color, value, and edge. So I'm going to come back in now with a warmer green. So still using my ultramarine blue and adding more Indian yellow to it. And some white. I want this to be a lighter. So I have my dark here. I've got some medium tones. I need more medium tones. I'll come back in with that. Well, this is kind of a medium tone, and it's more chromatic. It's brighter. So you see how I'm putting this more towards the center of the tree to create form coming towards us, and leaving those shapes along the edge to settle into the background, those more neutral and lighter shapes. Let's go even a little more alizarin or Indian yellow, or you can just use the regular yellow, or if you have a yellow ochre. In fact, let's put some regular yellow in there. That's going to bring this color up just a little bit. By up, I mean more chromatic, more of a bright color. And I'm going to add a little bit of white to that. Remember, if it looks too light, it's just about right. So I want to get that dark, medium, and light. Notice how I'm changing the direction of my brush, and I'm changing the size of the shapes. You don't want all one size. Connect your shapes. I'm leaving this down here pretty dark. So once I get down to there, I think I'm gonna stop, and then I'm gonna go back to my dark color. So I can just use that same pile. Notice how I just used the same pile of similar colors, and I can just push that pile one way or another, and that really helps to integrate the colors, give you more color harmony. That's sort of a bluer version. I like that. It's a little darker. Touches of that here and there where it's peeking through. Dark, medium, and light. I'm just overall thinking about having this tree being interesting, but being much more muted than the colors that we use in the foreground are going to be. So let's go darker yet. Let's go into let's go into more of our darks here, adding more red and more yellow to that dark. That's going to give us some nice warm touches in there. We don't want to be too dark because we're in the distance. So you can always add just a little bit of white. Simply like that. So I've already got those branches that I put in. I'm amending them a little bit, reshaping them maybe. I don't want them to be real obvious. And I also want something, you notice how you have these touches of just something real warm in there? You're going to get a lot of what's called reflected light. So this, and the ground is this warm golden color. So in the shadow, that the sunlight is going to come down and bounce off of the golden grasses and bounce back up into the shadow areas. And that's called reflected light, and it's really fun when you start understanding and seeing reflected light and things. It really helps to bring your paintings alive. So it's not gonna be the exact same color, but it's going to, in other words, it's going to influence the things that are in there. So you're going to see these touches of gold, the tree trunk, but influenced by the gold. And you're going to see touches of this green in the shadow, influenced by the gold. So adding more yellow to that green in the shadow. We want it to be dark, but we want to just see that influence of the light. So cool. Just on the bottom undersides where it's gonna reflect up, just touches, just tiny little touches make a difference. So we're going to leave that for now. Remember, that's my way to keep from actually spending too much time in one area, is just to tell myself, okay, we're going to leave that for now and we'll come back to it. And most of the time we don't need to come back to it, but that is okay. This is dry now, so I want to get more of this background golden colors in on the ground so I can then work on top of it. So let's take our gold pile, add some more yellow to it, lighten it up a little bit. Adding white to this also helps with your yellow. Your yellow is going to tend to be pretty transparent, and adding a little bit of white to it is going to help keep it from being too transparent. It's a fine line though. You don't want to add so much that you start going pastel with your color. You want to keep that nice bright chroma. So all I'm doing is coming back in and getting this background gold going that really sets off this fun pattern that we've created with the tree trunks, or the vine trunks back here. So I'm going to, sorry, I just got distracted there for a moment. I'm going to add this in to here, just so we have something to work with. Thinking about also reshaping those trunks a little bit. I love the way grapevines get these really curly shapes to them. That's a lot of fun. So we've got a lot of gold there. Let's put some of this gold in around here too, since we've got it. We're going to go lighter as we go in the distance, adding white, getting a little bit more neutral. And neutral to yellow means adding its complement, which is purple, which is made up of yellow and red, right? So if you want to neutralize a yellow, you're going to add a little bit of yellow and red, which are also darker colors. So if I want to stay lighter, I've got to add white. That's going to give me a yellow back here that's a little more neutral and lighter. And it's going to reflect the distance a little better. Okay, so we'll set that in there to work with that for a while. And then I'm going to work a little bit on these posts just so that I can then have fun in those leaves. That's going to be our fun part. Let's take this dark area. I'm adding red and Indian yellow to it. Warm it up. Lighten it up a little bit. You'll notice we have sort of a light side and a dark side to those vine trunks. And really, we're just randomly putting this color in here. I'm going to put some of it up in here in our dark. You see how this dark is a very warm, it's got alizarin crimson, and it's got Indian yellow. And I'm just randomly adding that in there. And I'm getting some onto my trunks, trying to give my trunks some interesting shapes. As I go back, I'm going to add a little bit of white to that. The wonderful thing about white is it cools a color down as well. So it's going to add just adding white will cool your color into the distance, which is what we want to. Let's add touches of this to this. See, just random touches. I'm not being careful. I'm just randomly putting in. I want a bunch of different colors in these posts and in these trunks. The posts are going to be leaning more towards a grayish color because they're just dead wood, and this is living wood. So a little bit of that. Let's go a little bit yellower yet. In fact, let's come down into our yellow color pile and add a little bit of red to it. So, dark, medium, and light. Whenever I'm working on any shape, I'm just kind of thinking about dark, medium, and light. I'm going to add touches of that. I'm going to add touches of this to this side of the post. I'm not doing one straight line because these posts are old and they have lots of little ins and outs and dips to them. You really should, they can be leaning one way or another. They can be a little bit bent. In fact, I really want to, they can be a little bit bent. They can be leaning. That's all good stuff. All right. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on these yet because we'll do more later. But remember, as you get into the back, that they're getting smaller. And we're just doing little touches. Little touches. Maybe some of the light comes through. All right. We're going to just leave that for now. And let's think about this shadow colors here and the leaves and in the vines, grapevines. Okay, so let's start with ultramarine blue again. And let's just add a touch of Indian yellow to it to get a very blue-green. Let's put some of that in here. Again, just not thinking about painting shapes right now. I'm thinking about making texture, creating texture in this shadow. And I like to have nice, pretty colors going on. You can come down into the light space. Again, varying the way you hold your brush is hitting the canvas, varying the sizes, much as we did up here, just varying those sizes. I don't want to get real, you don't want to get precious with it. Okay, adding a little white because we're going into the distance for that color. All of these colors. And as we go into the distance in these, notice how I'm reshaping those, thinning out the posts in the back that were kind of thick because we're using a thick brush. And I'm getting random shapes going on. I also want to get, we'll add that later. Okay, dark, medium, and light. So we've got some darks and we've got started some texture going on there. So now we need a medium green color. And we want our mediums and our lights to be more, let's use this spot. We want them to be more chromatic, more colorful. So I'm going to use my phthalo. I'm using both of my yellows with this. I'm getting a fairly bright, colorful yellow. Let's see how colorful we can go, and then we can back off of that. So this color is very, very chromatic. It's very like crayon-like. So I'm not going to use a lot of it, but I'm just going to add some touches in here. It's going to bring a little bit of liveliness, I think. But we won't add a lot of it because it's just too bright green. And as I'm going now, I'm going to start adding touches down here in the foreground, because as I'm mixing colors, just because I just want some of those colors in, but we'll work with them later. So that's two green. Let's add Indian yellow to it. And let's add a little bit of white, make it a little bit lighter. It's always a process with color mixing. Just finding different colors by mixing them and trying them. So now we've got a color that's a little bit lighter. Remember in our shapes that we're forming here, we're just kind of coming down a little bit in these areas. And we're not adding a whole lot of this. We're going to see how we like it and see how it goes. Changing up the way I hold the brush, the angle of my brush. I want this to be real loose. This is a nice color for moving back into the background because it's cooler and a little more neutral of a green. And as we go back here, we're just going to go back to big flat shapes. We're not going to put detail back there. And by detail, I mean small shapes with crisp edges. As we move into that distance, you're going to have less and less of that. It's just going to be soft. All right, we've got some in this. Let's add some more yellow to that color. So every time I go back, I just add a little bit of a different color. More yellow, more white, and see what we get with that. Notice I kind of squished my brush off onto the palette to keep from building up paint down here in the ferrule. or I wipe it off with my paper towel, because you just don't want to have those strange colors appearing when you don't want them to. So this is all about comparison. I'm comparing the colors and making sure I'm getting lighter and brighter if that's the direction I'm going. Adding even more yellow, because I really want to get this spring yellow color going on. Spring green kind of, even though this wasn't in the spring, but it's more the light through the leaves kind of color. So when you get along to this top, you want to make sure that you don't want a straight line. So we're going to have some of these that go way up here like this. And we're going to have some that come dip down in areas where you see that background. We're going to have the random, especially up here towards the front. You get those little vines that really shoot up towards the sky. And those are darker than we want them to be right now. We'll come back in with some light colors with them too. But we're just staying really loose and adding some of this for right now. And we'll come back and add the next color. All right, you notice I'm not gonna do as much. I might do one more layer. Let's add a little bit of just white to this, which will keep it nice and neutral as we go back. Just to get a little bit more. You got to make sure those shapes as you go back are very small, but soft. That's looking a little too light to me, but I think it will darken up as it dries. We'll keep an eye on it and we'll come back. If it pops out too much, then we'll change it, but I think it's going to be all right. Pretty much from here back, I'm not going to do any more than that as far as detail goes. You might have a little bit of sunlight popping through the vines down here. So that's about probably all we're going to do down there. But up towards the front, you can tell we get even yellower and lighter. And this is the point where you have to be careful not to add too much white. It's a fine line. You want some white, but you don't want too much because it'll go pastel on you, and you don't want that. There we go. That's a nice bright green. Let's put that over here. This is where the light's really coming and shining through. Get some of these way up here. Going over the top of some of these, connecting the shapes. You want to be super careful not to end up with polka dots. Polka dots we don't want. They don't look painterly, but we want an edge that's uneven. We want some. This is so much fun. I love doing this. Just when you start breaking the painting down into sort of abstract shapes and enjoying the way the colors are working together. And there's a lot of thick paint starting to build up. So what you'll find is you really have to start just putting down that brush stroke and leaving it. Don't brush it in or it'll just start muddying up. The other thing we're thinking about is right here in this foreground, having a little bit more feeling of leaf shapes. And I'm only doing that by using the corner of my brush to create little edges that have then give a resemblance of a leaf shape. So you're not really going to paint in leaf shapes, individual leaves in this style of painting, but if you just get some of those edges, just a few edges here and there, you start seeing leaves. The mind will see the leaves. And right in there, I want to go, see as that's drying back down in, it's getting darker and not standing out as much as it did when we first put that on there. So I'm going to add more yellow and more white yet to try to get one more step of brightness here. And as you go lighter and lighter, then you'll put less and less of that onto the canvas. And we want to stop about halfway back. We don't want to go all the way back here because we want to keep these softer and more neutral back in the back. But just where I've put those, I'm going to add something a little bit lighter. Again, using that corner to create little bitty leaf shapes. Not leaf shapes, just edges. Just creating edges. I'm squinting at it. Hold your painting back sometimes to squint at it and just see if that's going where you want it to go. Notice I'm kind of grouping my lights together and then leaving some areas that are the darker colors grouped together. So you get this ins and outs. You get 3 dimensions to the painting. If you just have a polka dots evenly across in each color, you don't get as much of a feeling of in and out. So that's very light stuff way up here where the sun's really catching it. You can tell that the paint is thicker on there. It's starting to get dimensional on there. And that's fun, and you could do that forever, but what you have to tell yourself is, like I do, we'll leave that for now. We'll come back to it. All right, so I'm going to leave that for now, and I'm going to think about the foreground a little bit, these shadows a little bit. So I want these shadows to be pretty neutral. Actually, what I'm going to do before I do that is put in a little bit of some of the purple that I've added. Oops, I just dumped my paper towel in the water. Get another one. So I've put in some purples down there just as a hint of maybe some grapevines going on. And so I'm going to take my ultramarine blue. Let's add Napthol red this time. Won't need, that red's pretty strong. Let's see what color that is. Ooh, that's some nice dark purple in there. You notice the grapes they hang in clusters down below towards the bottom of the vines, which is a lot of fun. Dark first, right? Just creating some shapes with dark. I don't want it as dark back there, so we're going to add a little bit of white to the edge over here. Let's see. Just to give a hint that there's might still be a few grapes on the vine. That looks too light. We'll come back to it and see if it settles. If it doesn't, we'll darken it up. So that's the dark, right? Okay, let's add a little more red to it. See what color that does. That's pretty fun. So again, I don't want to paint in bunches of grapes. I just want those colors in there. And your brain is going to say, oh, I think there must be grapes in there because I see some purple. Add some more blue to that. You know how grapes have that, they have this blue kind of fuzz on them, haze to them. Let's see if we can get some of that going on. Just touch, touch, touch. Just giving some. Maybe there's some grapes, but not too much. I don't want to do too much. And up here in the foreground, blue, red. Let's use some alizarin. Changing it up, it's always good. Maybe in this foreground one, these are a little bit bigger right around in here. See, and that's gone too much, but we'll fix it. Bring in some more blue. Bring in some more alizarin. Darken that up a little bit. Touches, just touches. Look how evenly I've made that spaced. That's not good. It's just your brain. It wants to evenly space things. Let me take some blue take some of this out so I'm not so evenly spaced. Some blue and some green and darker green. Let's do that up here. I want to get, yeah, okay. I want to get some dark, there's some more ultramarine blue up there. And I want that there to be touches of this dark up in here so it looks connected. Just where there's some shadows and light, especially like around here. Don't want it to be two-dimensional. You can reshape anything that you don't particularly like. Create leaf shapes by negative painting around it. Just try not to be too fussy with it, just so that you get some shapes in there like that. And as I go back, I'm going to add a little bit of light to it. All right, don't want to get too polka dotty back there. I'm going to tone down some of these light purples way back there. That's good. And squint at that. Yeah, I'm pretty happy with that. Let's work on the ground a little bit. Let's see. We've got our gold going back there. I think if we start, I'm going to go back to my wider brush to work in this bigger shape, to give myself some, let's do some of these lighter greens that we've got them going on. Just want to keep this foreground really loose, so I'm just tapping in some of these colors to start getting them kind of blend. And back in the background, I'm going to keep real blended and horizontal. This is just weeds and stuff that are growing up in between the rows. Kind of get my mind going on what's going on here. I need some darker green that is under, or some shadow colors for underneath this stuff. We'll keep these darkest colors more in the center. We'll come on top of those with some of these flowers that we've got going on now. But I'm thinking about shapes, thinking about where do I want bits of flower and where do I not. But I like this color. Where was I? Oh, over here for some of this shadow. Let's bring some of this shadow in, this base of this post. The shadow's going to come along here. You're going to have grasses that are growing, but I want to do that with my smaller brush. For now, I'm using ultramarine blue, maybe a little bit of Indian yellow, a little bit of red, a bit of white. The blue and the yellow make the green, and then the red gives it some neutralizing. I want this color to be pretty neutral because it's really the yellow. But I want to get that value in. You notice this one is lighter than this one is lighter than the one in the foreground was. And we're going to think about that. And we're just kind of playing with these shadows in what direction, if we want them to go more this way. Because we don't want them, I like to keep that going on, so I don't want too much shadow, but I want to break that up a little bit. So I'm just going to break that up. Now see, you'd have grasses growing, so it's a really messy kind of area So you're going to have the dark against the light and the light against the dark, pushing up a little bit to give a little bit of a grassy edge to that shadow. Let's do some of this out here, this back here. This is where we want to start getting as loose as we can. A little more blue, a little more red. Let's see. Yeah, I like that kind of purplish color in there. Bluish and reddish. And that's the one thing that I do is I change the color a lot. So I'm not like looking for that one perfect color and then sticking to that color. Instead, I'm changing the color all over the place and seeing what I come up with. So, yeah, I want to get, you notice how up here we get a little more golden, a little darker. Let's put some of this straight up here just to color that. It's almost like a glaze because this Indian yellow is pretty transparent, but I just want this corner to be kind of warmer and golder. So I'm going to put some of that in there before I switch back over to my smaller brush again. See how messy it looks? You want to just try to stay messy as long as you can. I like to think of it as messy anyway. So, okay, I'm gonna restate those trunks there. Mostly alizarin crimson with some Indian yellow, a little bit of blue. Give myself a nice purple. And the vines are starting to speak to me a little bit. I'm starting to get a feeling for what these vines are, who they are, what they're. So I'm following some of those shapes. Some of this red is going to peek in. Just reshaping them once more. Bring some of this color down into here. I like that I like warming up that shadow. You never know what you're gonna like until you try it, right? Gonna start really not doing much with those background vines. Lighten that up a little bit, add some red, add some yellow. Get that neutral, a little bit more neutral, let's see. We like that. I like this color. I'm just gonna put some of that color in there because I like it. Some of these, it's pretty. See, colors don't always have to make sense. They don't always have to be logical. It can just be in there because you like it and it's pretty. So at least that's my theory. And I'm sticking to it. All right. So got a little bit of that going on there. I want to think about these, creating some interest in these trunks. Let's do a really grayish, bluish, you know how old wood is really quite gray. And I think that would be fun to put. So I've just got a neutral muddy, something muddy from my palette there, and I'm adding all these different colors. I love that about wood, old wood. It just has so many different colors in it. Most of them are pretty neutral, but you don't have to keep them that way. You can do them however you want. Added more white to that to get a lighter color. Adding some varieties of yellow to that too. Because this light. So I'm pulling the brush across and I'm tapping it. I'm doing all kinds of different things just to create texture. Mostly they're vertical shapes, so a few horizontal shapes. And of course, when you get back in the background, then much less detail going on. And, you know, I look at that and I decide if I like it or not. I think I'm going to add a little more red to that. And because it's leaning towards the green, it will neutralize it even more. That'll give me a different, slightly different color. I think I want it to be darker. So let's go back up here in our dark pile and do some alizarin crimson and some ultramarine blue with some yellow. So it's kind of neutral, kind of dark. These are our sort of our mid-tones in the posts. I like this color though. I think we'd see some of this on the vines. So I'm going to add a little bit to the vines. Trying not to cover up everything, but you know the vines need the dark, medium, and light too, just to show. Flipping my brush up here to get grassy kind of shapes at the base. And they always have stuff they aren't able to weed out real carefully in between the rows there. And at the base of these, there would be some grassy shapes. I like this neutral purple color. I think there's going to be some in here randomly. And then I want to go back to my golden colors. Take some yellow. My brush is still really dirty right now with that neutral color, so it's going to neutralize this yellow, which is just fine by me right now. Okay, I want to see the light on these, maybe the tops of it. Just here and there where it's touching. These have usually have little signs on them and stuff saying what the row numbers are, but we're not going to get that detail. So I got a little bit of light there, and then I'm going to go one lighter. I'm not doing a whole line. Adding a little more white. I don't want too much of it to come off my brush, so I clean off that brush so I can control the amount of paint that's coming off the brush, because I just want a few little touches of very light. And I'm just touching my brush to the canvas. I don't want it to be a real even thing. Maybe that'll be a little bit back here, not too much. And I don't know, maybe we'll see a little bit on the sides of these. Let's do that. This isn't going to show up much because we've got it against that light background, but that's okay. Maybe part of this. There you go. Something like that. All right. We've got some light going on those. You notice how the light in the vines is drying back. It's settling back in again. It's not anywhere near as bright as it felt like when we first put it down. So we'll come back in at the end and do one more layer of even brighter. I often have to do that when I'm painting. Let the paint sit until it dries and then come back for one more pass to just brighten up those brights. Let's do some grassy stuff down here. Let's use our yellow and our phthalo and get some bright colors going on. Again, I'm not trying to really define things. I'm thinking more about the values and the colors. And you notice I shifted the way I'm holding my brush from holding it loosely this way to holding it loosely this way. And that just gives me, I can push with it. If you push, you get some kind of grassy looking shapes. And I can also just keep my shapes much looser. I'm just kind of jiggling my arm. If you had too much coffee this morning, this is a good part to put it to use. I'm just kind of jiggling my arm and pushing with it, thinking about where the light's hitting and where I want some of these. And you notice I'm not going too far back into the painting with these more with these shapes. You want to stay up in the foreground. They're bigger in the front and smaller as you go back. You always want to keep in mind that distance is creating that change in size. All right, added some white and added some yellow to that color. Whenever you add white, when you're creating sunlight, you got to add something warm to it as well. So if I'm creating the way the sun is hitting these grasses, I've got to be sure to add a little bit of yellow to the color so it stays warm. Otherwise, it will get cooler as you add the white, and then it won't look right. I'm just laying my brush on there. I'm rolling it around and tapping it and pushing it. And back here, I'm going to use this color because it's nice and light. And I'm just going to do some pushing and some big overall shapes back there. So that's all I want in the background. Maybe some of this green comes a little bit into this light area. Breaking that up a little bit. We're going to have to break up that line. We'll do it with the yellows. All right, I want to be too careful too that I'm not making lines up here. You notice how I've started to get into sort of these horizontal shapes, and I don't really want that. I want to be sure and create bigger shapes. Come off the canvas with this green up in front. Keep it real loose though. All right, I want also these to be, I got flowers in there. So I've got some purple flowers, I've got some yellow flowers. So to make the flowers, let's start with a shadow yellow color. So I'm going to use this Indian yellow here. And I'm just going to put a little bit of alizarin in there. That's going to neutralize it down a little. Don't go too much or you'll just have a muddy green again, and that's not what we want. We just want to think about, okay, maybe some of these flowers are going to be in here. Again, just flatly holding my brush and tapping it. Thinking about the shapes I'm making. A bunch of these white flowers will grow here together. Maybe some of them are here. These are yellow flowers, not white flowers. So let's go to some straight yellow with white. I moved my pile there. When you start wanting to get really, start wanting to get really bright colors, you got to sometimes move your pile because this pile is getting really neutralized. And also, I'm building up lots of paint here. So this is the point where as you put down the color, it just starts taking up the paint below. So if you keep your brush really flat, barely touch the canvas, and just tap it on there to get the paint to leave your brush. A little bit, tiny bit of straight white, just a tiny bit, and it'll mix in there a little bit too because I really don't want straight white. And then I'm going to take a tiny bit of straight yellow, mix that in kind of with the whites. So I'm mixing, in a sense just mixing those colors right on the palette. And wherever the edges look like they're too much, then I can blend them back in. You know, I wanted some of this yellow back up in here. I want a sense of this yellow back in the background, so I'm just gonna, that's still wet back there, so it's gonna blend in a little bit. And we get this transition phase between slightly being able to tell that they're flowers, slightly bigger shapes, and then you get the bigger shapes up here. Let's take some of that white on this one. I think these are probably dandelions, don't you? I don't know. We'll do that, and then we want to get in some purple shapes. So let's take our, let's stick with the ultramarine. I'm going to go to a new spot so that I get a brighter color. Let's go with the ultramarine and the Napthol red. All right, because I want something kind of fun and purple down here in these purple flowers. Here's our dark. Ooh, that's nice and dark, isn't it? I'm obviously going to have to use that dark a little bit up here. Ooh, and I think these vines in the foreground, they need some of their dark back. Don't cover up everything you've done already, but just in the base of the dark side of the posts and in there, we can get some of this dark back. Don't cover up all those nice shapes you did before in the trunk, but up in this foreground, we're going to have some nice dark. Okay, just using that for touching that. Okay, so we were over here on the, now we're going to add white to that color and red, and that's going to lighten it up and warm it up. Remember, always adding red when we add white or yellow, anything warmer. Okay, going back to my, let's get this lighter blue. I'm gonna try some phthalo blue. I don't know if it's gonna make I don't think it'll make a nice purple though. Here's where it would be fun to have a mixed purple, but we don't have that on our palette today. Yeah, no, see, that's a really muddy, really muddier than the ultramarine. And I know why that is, but I'm not gonna go into that right now. So let's stick with our red and our ultramarine to make our purple for our flowers. And our white. And they're not going to be quite as vivid as the ones in the painting there, but they'll work. Let's see. They didn't even have to be purple flowers. It could be any color you wanted. But I like them in here. Just shapes, in dark, medium, and light. Random shapes. Adding more white, adding more red to give the light side of those. Don't cover up all your dark, just cover up some of your dark. And we'll come back with another layer of foliage to I keep making these in long vertical line or horizontal lines like that. That's not what I want. I want these more in blobby shapes. Oh, I like that color. Maybe this might be like maybe even lupin. It's lupin. We're going to add more blue. You can have so much fun with flowers. I make up flowers all the time. I know flowers by their faces, but not by their names generally. There's some of that bluer purple that's pretty in there too. Bluer and lighter. Just a variation of colors. That's really it. And back here, then remember we're getting softer. I add a little bit of this because this is a lighter form of the purple, but just in very soft shapes. And in fact, I'm going to rinse my brush and blend it. Okay, let's see. I'm going to go a little bit lighter again and a little bit redder again. So you see how I just keep start with the dark and then I keep adding layers of color and value, and then that creates a feeling that there's something going on. There's detail when it's not really detail at all. It's just shapes. This very light back here. All right, and then I just want to add back in some, let's bring in this, well first let's make some green up. Let's use our, let's use our phthalo, right? Let's do our brighter green. It's easy to neutralize a color once you've started it, but it's hard to get it back into a chroma. So start bright, start chromatic, and then you can neutralize as you go. Let's see, I don't know if I want to add white yet. But what I do want to do is pick up my liner brush that we talked about and get that wet. Because I want to use that to just give a little bit, just here and there, a couple of feelings of grasses or stems or leaves or whatever, but in a very loose way. So when you're using your liner brush, you want to put water into the paint. That's the only time I do that. And then if you brush it back and forth into the paint like this, you'll get a nice fine knife edge to it. And then I hold it real loosely in my hand to create some shapes like this. And this is a very bright green, so I won't use a lot of it. I'm flicking it upward, but I'm wiggling it around too to create more random shapes. You don't want to start doing individual blades of grass or anything. So I just put a little bit of that very bright green. I don't want a lot of it in there. Instead, I'm going to go a little bit lighter and add some Indian yellow, and that's going to make it a slightly more natural looking color without being too boring. Again, preparing the brush, holding it real loosely. And if you push it and wiggle it around, you get these edges to the brush that just make it look like something's going on back there without being too literal with it. And a lot of this, a little bit goes a long ways. I always do too much, but you can always come back and get rid of some. I want this to go right off the edge of the canvas here. Okay, I want to go more neutral. Add more yellow. At this point, really, you're just having fun and playing. Adding more yellow to it to get a different color of green. So like that. And I want to get in a little bit of dark back there too. You know, you get touches of dark going on underneath the shadows. So I've got ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson there that I'm just mixing up. It's going to be very purpley, but let's see if we like it. So I just want some touches of dark in this foreground. That'll just, getting that value is going to be what makes it pop. Just little touches, and I'm probably going to go back over some of those. Maybe some of this is in here. Reshape some of the things that you did if you don't like them. I'm going to go back to my small brush again. And I'm going to let's go with a bluish color with some Alizarin Crimson, which is what we had up there, but I'm just doing kind of a lighter version, a more neutral version, by adding a little bit of yellow to it. Let's see. Blending out some of these shapes of the darks that maybe got a little too edgy, let's call them. This is kind of our shadow color too, so you can rethink about these shadows. I wanted to get rid of that edge. Something slightly darker back there. The jump between the dark here and the dark there is a little too strong, so I need an intermediary dark here. Not much too dark. We can fix that easy enough. Yeah, it's kind of have that gradation, lighter and lighter as you go back. Bring some of that green in there. And some of our, let's add some blue to that green. And a little bit of alizarin, neutralizing it a little bit. Gotta get those bottoms of the grasses where they have shadow. So, I don't want to get too fussy with this. I've probably already gotten too fussy with this down along here. And if I think about it for a few days, I would probably come back and take out maybe part of this so that it wasn't quite so fussy. But right now, I'm just looking for edges. I'm looking for places where there's a sharp edge in a place I don't like. The only place I really want sharp edges is in here. So now I'm going to look at it, and I wanted to bring a little bit of lighter green back in here. And let's use some of this neutral to get it really neutral, because some of these shapes here are a little much in this mid area. Lighter as you go back. Add a little more yellow to that. Keeping everything really horizontal in the background, but I just want some different shapes back there. All right, that's looking pretty good. Not too unhappy with that. You know, I really wanted to bring back in some of my yellow gold, the grasses, yellow, some red. My brush is still dirty at this point, and that's a good thing, because it keeps it neutralizes those colors a little bit. I'm really squinting my eyes right now, so that I can add some of this golden, some areas where it's just the grasses. It's not all grass, but it's dry grass. There's the words. So hard to come up with words when you're painting. All right, adding more Indian yellow as I come forward. Blending that back so there's a gradation. Just want to see that. Yeah, so I'm not going to do much here because, like I say, I'd probably come back later and simplify some of that a little bit. But for now, I just want to make sure I've got gold in here, because I like that gold. I'm going to touch some of this gold up in here again. And that has to do with harmonies, you know, just having, you don't want to just isolate one color in one spot of your painting, but you want to have it in different areas. And I also want some of that, so as these leaves turn, they start going real reddish. That's too light. So I'm just taking my Alizarin Crimson and my Indian Yellow just to bring some warmth up into here. maybe a few of those leaves are starting to turn a little bit, but I want to just get that variety of color up in there, and maybe even warmer, more Indian yellow, more red. Let's see. Just trying stuff out now. I like that down here, breaking up these purples a little bit. Ooh, that's pretty. That's pretty. Maybe there's some on here. Looking at the shapes. Okay, I'm mostly just playing now, which is good. But the other thing I wanted to do was add some. Ooh, I've got this. This is the one color I wanted to add some back here too. Got to be careful because I don't want it to be too bright back there. I want it to be more neutral, but I want something warm. So I added a little bit of white and a little bit of blue so that it wouldn't. I don't want a lot, but I don't want this tree to be all green. That's good enough. And what else did I want to do? We didn't have to, if I was unhappy with the tops of my vines at this point, I would come back in with the color of the distance there, the distant hills, and make some more shapes in there. But I'm not too unhappy with the way those turned out. But just to show you how you would do that, you know, you'd go back to your color of the hills, which was mostly ultramarine blue and white. And the one thing you do when you're doing sky holes, or that you have to think about, is that you want them to be a little bit darker than, so if I'm making a hole in this tree that's showing this behind it, I'm going to make that a little bit darker than that color, because it's just the way it works. But I think this is way darker. Let's see. Yeah, that's way darker. Whenever you have a tiny little hole peeking through, if you make it the same color as that, it's going to really shine out like a beacon. It's going to look way too bright. So if you want it to reshape then your tree, or lighten it up a little bit, or reshape your branches, I might thin that branch out a little bit, then that's how you do it. You come in with your background color, and you can reshape those shapes back there. You can add interest. I don't like how thick this is actually, so I think I'm just gonna cut that into two right there. And that is a better shape to me. So yeah, you're just thinking about those shapes. You can do the same thing with your gold down here. If you have some things that you don't like about the way the bottoms of your vines are shaping, have shaped up, you can come back in with your gold, which was just Indian yellow and white mostly. But again, you want to make sure you get it dark enough if you're going to go in between. And then if you don't like the shape, you can come in like this. Add a few of these along the bottom. Reshape those. You know, it's up to you how much you want to do, but by painting around a shape, you're going to change it up a little bit. You can paint down into these grassy brush strokes you did. If they got too thick, you know, you can make all these little adjustments. Just sometimes little tiny things will really make a difference. It's funny. The only other thing I wanted to do was come back in with one more layer of my lights on my vines. So I want this to stay pretty. I'm getting clear over to the edge, but I want this to stay really clear in color. So I'm going to start a new pile. just a tiny, tiny bit of phthalo blue and my yellow, my Hansa yellow. I want to be careful not to pick up that purple because that's really going to neutralize the color. Let's see what that does. That's brighter, huh? Again, I'm thinking about in the foreground, the shapes are going to be a little bigger. Maybe I'll add some corners to some of these, some edges, and I really like these, the way they trail up into the sky. They're reaching for the sky. Again, don't cover up everything you've done before, but we're just adding one little extra pop of another layer of lighter and brighter. Think about your clustering those together, where the sun is hitting, like this one is coming forward more and another one is going back more, so you don't get polka dots. Don't want to go too far back with that. Instead, I'm going to add a little bit of blue to that, and I'm using ultramarine blue, and that's going to really dull that color down at the same time. But I want to get one more change of color even to these backgrounds. You see how that's duller than the one we used up there? I'm not going to put as much, but I felt like that was just the two colors wasn't giving it enough dimension. I want to neutralize that one a little bit. All right. And just for fun, let's do the same thing down here on our purple flowers. Let's come back with one more layer lighter. Add some sparkle to those. Not too much. Don't want to cover up all that wonderful texture you've got going on, but just right in there where I've got some more focal points going on. I'm going to add a little more blue to that. I think just right here I want to touch on these grapes, or maybe a couple of spots the sun is hitting them. And that's probably just about it. I like that color though, so I'm just going to add some in here. Again, you know, it's about just creating a variety of colors, and that makes things look like things are going on. The only thing I'm seeing that's bothering me is I'm seeing a little bit of the canvas texture right in there. So I would probably come in with one of my neutrals or something. Fill that in a little bit so it's not quite so obvious. Because the yellow was behind it, it was like a dark with little yellow spots, which I didn't really like. But I think that's about it for today. I just wanted to work on a few places that I wasn't really happy with. For one thing, you know, things have dried down darker as they normally do, so I need to get a little bit more brightness up in here, and some colors that are moving more towards the golds. I've moved towards very spring greens, sort of yellowish greens, and I want to get a little bit more of some gold greens in there that would be more typical to Vineyard. And I also wanted to, let's see, I've got a list for myself. I've made a big jump between the bigger flowers to very distant flowers, and I need more of this kind of medium-sized flowers in between. I want a little bit, try to get a little bit brighter color in there in the flowers. And I also want some larger leaves in the front, so we really see that gradation of size from larger to smaller in the background, and maybe a few little touch-ups back. Let me just do that. Okay, so let's go ahead and start with these leaves. I've still got yesterday's dirty palette up here, And you can see, because I have the Masterson palette, it's still quite wet. I can still use it. So I think I'm going to take some of this lighter green that I have and add some gold to it and see if I can't get some golder colors. I want to stay bright, but I do want more of a yellowy tone to some of these. And I think I'm going to start in a different pile. See if I can get some very gold greens. Use just a touch of phthalo. Let's try to keep that color clean. See what I get there. It's turning a little golder. I like that, just to give some more depth to the color there. It was starting to look like one color. So then what I was talking about, I want some feeling of bigger leaves up in here in the front. So that just means bigger shapes. Doesn't mean necessarily painting leaves, but just bigger shapes. Just in the front, and then gradating down to the smaller shapes in the back. Just a few. Okay, I'm going to add a little white to that. And a little more gold. See, that gives it a little more depth, I think. And I often do this with a painting. I will come back later and after it's dried and I've thought about it a little bit and see if there's just a few touches that I think are going to add more depth. So you see there, I've just come in with a lighter version of that color, which is more gold. I'm going to use some of that back here. I think that gives us some nice depth. And I'm going to go a little bit lighter back there in the distance, keeping up with my gradations. Back here. Also wanted some tiny little things going on in the distance. I like this bright yellow gold, yellow green. All right, so these leaves up here can be a little bigger. I just really had lost that shape, that size differentiation from forward to back. So that's what I'm adding in, some of that. Up in the colorful areas, I wanted some of that. Okay, what else was on my list? I don't like the way that this has jumped from big flowers to no flowers. I want some sort of mid-sized flowers in there. Let me see what I'm going to do with that. I also wanted to thin these flowers out a little bit, probably especially in there. So let's go keep up with our kind of gold area here and work around these flowers so they feel just too heavy to me down here. See if I can bring a little lightness into them, get rid of some of them. Editing out, I do this a lot with my paintings. I'll have much more detail and then I'll come back and edit out a good amount of the detail to get to where I like it a little better. I gotta watch my lines. I'm getting those lines in here. And something about these yellow flowers just really didn't make the grade to me. A little too simple, I guess. All right, adding more white to that. Again, working on, that's usually the biggest thing when you come back after you've thought about it for a little bit, is adding another layer of lights. The lights will just go dark on you in acrylics. And if you want to keep that lightness, I'm liking that shape a little bit better. Squinting my eyes in there. All right, that's gotten a little bit easier to do, easier on the eye to me. So now I'm getting a little more of a feeling of large, medium, and small flowers, which I like. But those need some green under them. Let's use some darker green. So you have to be a little careful when you use an old palette like this. Some of the paint is dry, and you don't want to get those little chunks of dried paint into what you're doing. This is really thick up in there. I'm not sure I want to keep it or if I want to add some. I think I want to add some lighter green is what I want to do in there. So let me go into this green gold pile. See what we get there. Okay, that's not too bad. Using some real loose brush strokes there. Now let's get that a little brighter. Yellow and phthalo. Just these little finishing touches, and a lot of times I will leave my painting sitting somewhere that I can see it during the day. So like when I first get up in the morning, maybe it'll catch my eye, I'll just glance at it. Those glances can be really good for helping you figure out what you need to fix in a painting. A little bit of green, I've got that loosened up a little bit. Let me see if I can get a prettier purple. I think I've tried this before. I'm going to go with the phthalo and the Alizarin because those are both cool leaning colors, a cool red and a cool blue. And that helps to keep your color pure. When you use a warm color and a cool color together, you tend to get a little more neutralized colors. This is also why I generally keep dioxazine purple on my palette, because I like to get a really pretty purple, and it's just hard to get, and that's not a pretty purple. So let's go back to our warm red and our warm blue. But I didn't want to switch over to the dioxazine purple because I know you guys, I didn't start with that in this painting, so I want to stay consistent to the colors that I was going to start with. I'm being really careful to pick very clean areas of my paint when I'm picking up the color because the paint has gotten pretty dirty from yesterday's session. Yeah, see, it's just not going to happen with these purples. We're not going to get a pretty bright color. So I'm gonna try a different angle and go with a red pink color and see if I can't get a little bit of pop going on down there. Might not like it, but it will pop, I think. I think what I'll do is just add, this is actually got some dirty colors down in my ferrule, which dirtying up that color, which we don't want. So I'm going to add just a touch of yellow, warm that pink up a little bit, and see if I like that. I'm just searching for something that gives me a little bit more interest in here. It gives me a little pop of color. And as we talked about back here, I want sort of some mid-sized flowers up here, bigger ones. And yet, that's looking really like strong and overdone, but I'm gonna let it dry because I think we'll be surprised that it dries a little softer. We'll see. I might be wrong. We might be doing a third version of this till I get what I want. And then I may never get what I want, so there it is. Adding white and adding yellow to go for a lighter. So, and you know, if you liked those more neutral purples, that's all good. So, all a matter of what you like and what pleases your eye. I keep getting these lines going horizontally that I don't want. I'm going to put some of that in and then come back and take it back out with my golds. Ooh, and then if I get some, let's go very yellow. Let's go very yellow with this. This yellow orange. I wasn't happy with those yellow flowers because they were so much the same color as the ground there, that I wasn't happy with them. All right, so let me see. Those are nice and bright. Those make me happy. A little bit more green to go in front of some of those, just to pop that up just here and there. This almost looks like a bouquet. Lighter greens. I wanted to loosen up some of this. Pops lighter green. That's fun. I don't know if you can hear in the background, my husband's practicing his bass upstairs. We have a little rock and roll garage band that we play when people can be out playing. We haven't played since this whole COVID thing started, but I'm the drummer. We have a lot of fun. My daughter's the lead singer, and we just have fun doing covers of old rock and roll songs and blues songs and R&B songs and all kinds of crazy stuff. Whatever strikes our fancy. Something a little darker. So this is the playing time that I don't always show on the videos because, you know, I'm trying to make a short video and I'm trying to just, you know, get through the process, but I actually spend a whole lot of time playing like this. Not always to the benefit of the painting, I have to admit, but I find it fun. I wanted some warmer tones in here. I felt like everything got real cool over in here. So between the cool shadows and the highlights, you can have a touch of warmth going on, which is kind of fun. And then of course I just usually lighten that up a little bit and give a lighter version. Got so many colors on these posts. I love it. See, now I've stayed real dark down here, but now I've got all this. I have got to do something to break up this little bouquet that's right there. Those were my purplish colors. Let me see. Purplish shadow colors. Ultramarine. Alizarin. Lighten it up just a tad. So I've got to get that so doesn't look like a big bouquet of flowers. It looks like wildflowers growing. When I do this kind of stuff, I really squint my eyes. That helps me see what I'm doing, see the shapes instead of the detail. You can really get bogged down in that detail. That whole color is a tad too dark. I'm going to lighten it up some. Mixing in this lighter purple. Going way purple on the shadow. Not sure I like it, but it's okay. Just experimenting. You know, you can't be afraid to experiment when you're painting like this, because I mean, you just never know what's gonna come of it, and you can always fix it later if you don't like it, which is really kind of key to what's going on, is the experimenting, you know, the experience of it. If you get stuck in being afraid you're going to ruin it, then it's really hard to have fun. And it's really hard to find new things, you know. Discover maybe new brush strokes or new color combinations. It's really hard to do that if you're afraid of making mistakes. And that's why I like to work on these really small canvases, because you know, you can just experiment and have fun instead of getting worried about wasting expensive materials. Adding a bunch of ultramarine blue to that green to get something darker. Doing my little squigglies. I like squigglies. And, you know, these new bright colors of flowers might not be your cup of tea. I could totally get that. I like them. So I'm going to go. You can see they're drawing kind of two-dimensionally again. So I'm going to add some touches of lighter color for fun, so they don't get too two-dimensional. And I'm gonna go kind of very light, very white. And that coming in with the light too tones down the overall brightness of the color. If you want it toned down. And I think I'm a little happier with that kind of concept than I was with the other one. What else did I want to do largely as far back? I have a little issue with this trunk in the far back. It's kind of a funny shape and funny color. Maybe I'll just put some touches of this gold back in, thinning out things back there, lightening this up a little. Like this golder color here for the it's also getting a lot of canvas texture in there, because there's not very much paint right in there. So if I get another layer and then also going a little warmer, so I get gotten so kind of cool with the yellows in there. Let's get this feeling of the light coming through between these a little bit. Let's see if I can do that. Let's see if we like that or not. Maybe a little bit, but what was that purple? This was that purple, I think. Tone it down a little. Maybe too much. A little idea of it, a hint of it anyway. trying to decide if I feel like I got big enough on those. I feel like almost, but not quite. So I'm going to go back in. Where was I? Here? I'm going to go back in with one more layer. It's different this time. I'll use the Ultramarine, so I get different colors. Just want these foreground leaves to be very bold and the shapes to be bigger. And I think I'm pretty happy with that. Let's do some more green, green. Yeah, so, you know, painting is a process, not a product. And I think that sort of mindset is really helpful in enjoying the process of painting, because above all, you know, it's about having fun and enjoying the process. And so you can't get too precious about it, and you have to let yourself have fun. Let yourself play. You know, painting is a way to rediscover the wonderful benefits to your life of play. And we kind of forget to do that when we get older sometimes. Just play. Just let your mind go. Let your thought processes go. And I'm doing that more of that today, which is why I'm having a harder time talking. But if you can do that, it's a great benefit. Getting little corners. I'm not painting leaves, but I'm just getting more edges up in here in the leaf shapes and bigger edges up in front. Let's use some of this intermediate color back here. Felt like I wanted some little tiny shapes back there, a little bit. Not too much though. Where's my darker green? Yeah, alright, well, let's see if I did everything I wanted to do. Lose some of the flowers, reshape the flowers, brighter flowers, larger leaves in front, and the funky little trunk back there. The other thing that's bothering me a little bit, and I almost hate to do it because you know, I don't want to ruin it. After I just told you not to be worried about ruining it. The cloud up there is just a little too, it's very white, and it's, to me, it's, I don't like it. So I don't want it to be that white. I want a little warmth up here. So that, I just took that yellow orange I had and put some more white in it. And warm up that white of the cloud just a touch. And it's gonna fade back in quite a bit, so not to worry there. But it's harder to blend when you're working in a dry sky like that, but I just wanted that to be a little bit warmer. Oh, and then I think I did that already. I wanted some very much lighter, just right a little bit of lighter on these. Here and there. Alright, I think that's enough. See the very light colors I put down here have disappeared already. All right. I think I'm happy with that. I just wanted to show you those changes that I made, and that's it.